Okay, so anyone who's really trying to get into World War I history, you're bound to come across Alvin C. York. You've probably got your books, articles, maybe even dug up an old telegram or two.
You always find something interesting digging through those archives. And when it comes to York, what we've got here, well, it's not your typical war hero story. I mean, this is a guy who became one of the most decorated soldiers in American history.
You'd think he was born for the battlefield then, huh?
But you'd think so. But here's the thing. He was a pacifist. Believed killing was wrong. Like, really believed it.
So we've got ourselves a bit of a paradox then.
Exactly. How does someone who hates the very idea of war become this legendary figure? Well, to understand that, we need to go back to 1917 when America gets involved in World War I.
Right, because this isn't just any war. This is trench warfare, brutal, mechanized, something the world had never seen before.
Exactly. And it's into this hellscape that we find Alvin Cullum York, a deeply religious man from rural Tennessee. He belonged to a pacifist sect, meaning he opposed war for religious reasons.
So this wasn't just like, oh, I don't really like fighting for this guy. This was a core part of who he was.
Absolutely. This was a guy whose entire life was guided by his faith. And when he was called up to serve, he actually tried to get out of it, claimed conscientious objector status.
He was basically saying, my beliefs prevent me from fighting.
Exactly. But as you can imagine, getting that kind of exemption during wartime, well, let's just say it wasn't easy. And for York, when his claim was denied, it threw him into a real moral crisis.
It's like his whole world was turned upside down. I mean, how do you reconcile your deeply held beliefs with this terrifying reality thrust upon you?
And this is where York's story takes a turn. He makes a decision. If he's going to be in the trenches, he's going to do his duty.
But that doesn't mean he's suddenly gung-ho about it.
No. The turmoil, the internal struggle, it never really goes away. But then comes October of 1918 and the Meuse-Argonne offensive. This is where the reluctant soldier becomes a legend.
This is where we see Alvin York the pacifist, well, Sergeant York, right?
You got it. York and his unit, they're tasked with taking out a German machine gun nest. It was practically a suicide mission.
And I'm guessing this is where things get really interesting.
Oh, it gets even better than interesting. See, his platoon is practically wiped out. York finds himself the ranking officer facing impossible odds. What happens next? It's the stuff of legend. York, armed with just his rifle, charges the German line.
Charges? You mean right into the thick of it? With all that machine gun fire?
He takes on the enemy practically single-handedly. It's this incredible display of courage, of tactical brilliance. I mean, historians and biographers still debate what drove him to do it.
I can imagine. Was it some kind of, like, almost superhuman bravery?
Well, York himself, he always said it was divine intervention, that a higher power was guiding his every step.
So he really felt like he was being protected.
That's how he saw it. But others, they point to his sense of duty, to those men he was fighting with, his comrades.
It's like this feeling of, I gotta do this for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was just pure survival instinct kicking in. When you're facing death, something takes over.
It's hard to know, right, when it's all happening at once.
It's probably impossible to separate one thing from another. I mean, we're talking about the chaos of war. But whatever it was, the outcome is undeniable. York single-handedly killed 25 enemy soldiers,
25?
captured 132 prisoners, and silenced a whole bunch of machine guns. His actions that day, they turned the tide of that battle. And some argue contributed to the entire Allied victory.
Incredible, but with all this, I mean, how does Alvin York the pacifist, how does he square all this killing with his belief?
That's the thing. He doesn't.
Like,
Completely. That internal struggle, it stays with him. Because, see, York never wanted any of this. He never sought glory. He never wanted to be celebrated for what he did. In fact, when he came home a hero, it was almost like he rejected the attention.
So he's this reluctant hero in every sense of the word.
Absolutely. And it's this reluctance that makes his story even more interesting, especially as we head into the 1930s and 40s, with Hollywood entering its golden age. I mean, York's story practically begs to be put on film. And sure enough, in 1941, Sergeant York, starring Gary Cooper, it hits the big screen.
And of course, 1941, America's on the brink of war again.
Exactly. And while the film tries to capture York's faith, his humility, his struggle with taking a life, it also kind of unintentionally becomes a powerful piece of propaganda.
So it's like this weird kind of double message.
It's exactly that.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, you have this man who never wanted to be a symbol of war, and yet here's his story, larger than life, being used to inspire a nation to fight.
It really makes you think about how we shape these narratives around war, especially during such pivotal moments in history. It's pretty amazing how Alvin York's story still speaks to us all these years later. I mean, here's this guy so torn up about the things he had to do during the war, and yet he ends up becoming this iconic American hero.
And that's where his story goes beyond just being about bravery on the battlefield.
Mhm.
It makes you think, what does it really mean to be a hero? Is it blindly following orders, or is it holding on to your morals even when everything's telling you to let go?
It definitely challenges our image of the classic war hero, that's for sure. Maybe real courage comes from facing those inner demons, wrestling with doubt and fear, but still managing to do what needs to be done.
Exactly. That's what makes York's story so powerful. It forces us to see past the medals and the accolades and recognize the human being behind them. This wasn't a glory seeker. This was a man grappling with impossible choices, ultimately driven by a deep sense of responsibility to his fellow man.
We've talked about all the different things people believe motivated York: faith, duty, survival. Maybe it was a bit of all of them colliding in the chaos of war.
And maybe that's the biggest lesson we can learn from Alvin York. Human experience isn't black and white. Our motivations are messy and often full of contradictions. Sometimes those gray areas are where we find the most profound truths about ourselves and the world.
York's story is a good reminder that history's never as simple as it seems in the textbooks. Behind those big historical events are countless personal stories, each with its own share of victories and heartbreaks, moral crossroads, and moments of unexpected grace.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And when we take the time to explore those individual stories, that's when history comes alive. That's how we connect with these figures from the past and understand that they were just like us. People dealing with uncertainty, fear, and doubt, even as they were shaping the world around them.
So to everyone listening, we'll leave you with this. What speaks to you most in Alvin York's journey? His unwavering faith, his acts of bravery on the battlefield, or maybe that lifelong struggle to reconcile his actions with his pacifist beliefs? Whatever resonates with you, let York's story be a reminder that courage can look like a lot of different things. And sometimes the most captivating heroes are the ones who never wanted the spotlight.